officially handed over the first part of the Commission report to President Ramaphosa yesterday. The Commission conducted its hearings over a period of more than 400 days of evidence and procedural hearings. To speak more about what part one of the report entails, we're joined now via Zoom by SABC specialist researcher Amil Umraw. Amil, very good morning to you and thanks for making the time. Amil, you've read the report. What does part one contain?
Well, part one comprises 874 pages, so let's start there. Zondo says that Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo says that the report came in 3 volumes. So it first looked at South African Airways and its associated companies, like South African Airways Technical and SA Express. The second volume of it looked at Gupta-owned media company, The New Age. And the third part looked at South African Revenue Services, which is SARS, as well as the topic of public procurement in South Africa.
Yeah. So what are some of the most outstanding recommendations in the report for you?
Well, if we go volume by volume, the Commission said that SAA had declined during the tenure of Dudu Myeni as the chairperson to an entity, and I quote here, sort of racked by corruption and fraud. And despite this, Myeni was retained as the chairperson. So what the Commission comes to find is that this was only because of the personal preference of former President Jacob Zuma to have Myeni as the chairperson. And it finds that Zuma, could not have justified his insistence to keep Myeni on board. And that's why he sort of escaped questions at the state capture inquiry. So therefore, what the Commission is requesting here is that the NPA considers, further investigation into Myeni and, whether she should be prosecuted for fraud. And then moving on from SAA, we've got the whole TNA debacle, the New Age. And then what basically the Commission finds there is that one of the earliest acts of state capture by the Guptas was the removal of Themba Maseko from GCIS, and also some scathing reports, so some scathing comments here about former President Jacob Zuma and, his replacement of Maseko, Nzonene Manyi. So he says that during sort of Manyi's term as DG of GCIS, millions of rands were spent on TNA in circumstances where there wasn't really any credible leadership or any value that was derived from this. So basically what the State Capture Commission is then recommending is that an investigation of possible criminal corruption be leveled against Mr. Tony Gupta on the basis of certain evidence offered before the State Capture Commission. And it also looks at possible criminal charges or investigations being handed over to people like Mr. Brian Molefe and Mr. Colin Matila for sort of enabling various state-owned enterprises to sort of advertise with TNA at the time. And then lastly, we get some introspection on SARS, specifically with Tom Moyane. So the State Capture Commission finds this is very much in line with the SARS inquiry led by Judge Nugent, that there was a massive failure of integrity and governance at SARS, and that there was a sort of reckless mismanagement by Mr. Moyane to sort of break down key institutions and key divisions within SARS to sort of enable state capture and to enable this environment for wrong activities. So the State Capture Commission basically fingers sort of Bain & Co., which is a consulting company, brings up that contract which we've heard about in the Nugent Commission, and basically recommends that Tom Moyane be charged with perjury in relation to his false evidence before Parliament.
Massive failure of integrity and governance at SARS, and also recommendations for the different entities. Just talk to us about the recommendations of the Commission.
Okay, I think we've spoken quite a bit about it, but let's look at, for example, some of the recommendations into SAA. For example, it finds that in SAA Express, SAA Express's dealings with the Northwest Department of Transport sort of revealed an elaborate scheme of corruption, the Commission found. And so it recommended that sort of government and state officials, as well as private individuals involved in that deal, should be brought to justice. There are investigations underway into this matter, and the Commission recommends that these be brought to some sort of swift conclusion. There's also been recommendations of various investigations that should be launched into possible prosecutions of various people, including, former South African Airways CFO Humeza Nhansi, Dudu Myeni, of course, and into criminal investigations into people like Regiment's Capital, Ramasabodi, Eric Wood, and failing that, like banks who were sort of involved in state capture as well.
Yeah. And just in terms of the National Prosecutions Authority, any recommendations for them in terms of the way forward?
Yeah, of course. So as we've outlined, a number of people's names have been put forward for further investigation by investigating bodies, and then a prosecution from that. If you remember, the Commission's scope is allowed to recommend further prosecution or further investigations into criminal matters, and the evidence before the Commission can be used in criminal proceedings. So basically, on that regard, we see people like Dudu Myeni. The Commission recommended that the law enforcement agency should further investigate the role of sort of Swiss port in a deal with SAA, and any of the above individuals like sort of Yake Kwinana, who have also appeared before the state capture inquiry, to the NPA to consider sort of criminal acts against them.
Thank you so much, Amil Umraw, the senior researcher, specialist researcher at SABC.